So today I'm going to be talking about complementary versus substitutive automation in healthcare. And the main idea here is essentially, when do we want to try to develop technology that complements existing labor, and when do we want to focus on substituting technology for existing workers? I'm going to focus on healthcare today. And the reason why I have this focus is because of a tension in U.S. economic policy. And this basic tension that I see is that if we essentially are constantly trying to make services cheaper, if we try to make for example, healthcare much cheaper by replacing existing workers, we're going to exacerbate the problem of automation killing jobs. If we focus more on complementary technologies, then we help solve that problem. The big question is, when should we focus on the latter? Well, here's a nice robotic technology that's been around for at least 10 years. This is the Paro. First concept paper on it was written in the late 1990s. And if you think about animal assistive therapy for the elderly, there's a wonderful way in which dogs and cats can have a therapeutic effect, particularly on dementia patients. But a lot of times they're just too hard to take care of. So these Japanese researchers developed the Paro as an interactive robot that could be in these sort of settings. And one of the things that we find is that sometimes there are really positive outcomes, and you have a lot of elders responding very positively. And that's often when the Paro is introduced with other personnel that are, say, trained to deal in this scenario. We also find a lot of ethicists worried that essentially the Paro becomes what Sherry Turkle calls a cheap date for the elderly. And we even see this mocked in shows like Master of None, where the Paro just replaces, say, visiting your grandfather or something. And so I think that essentially if we look at some of the research coming out of this sort of socially interactive robot, we see that often when it complements existing care patterns, you have better outcomes. When it replaces them, we have a lot of social concern. Another area where we should be thinking about complementary automation is when there's very sensitive information involved. So here I would contrast two technologies, Samaritan's Radar versus Project Durkheim. The Samaritans are an anti-suicide group. They try to prevent suicides in England, and they decided to release an app that would essentially allow people to monitor their friends' Twitter feeds and alert them if any of their friends appeared to express suicidal thoughts. This created a firestorm of protests. There were privacy complaints about them, etc. It was shut down, I think, within a couple of months. We can contrast that to Project Durkheim, where essentially people, first of all, had to opt in to have their social media postings monitored for suicidal ideation. But beyond that, when people were flagged, the flagging was in turn turned over to professionals who could help to seek intervention. And I think this is different than a sort of move fast and break things type of ethic. It's much more complementary. It's much more about people seeking help from others who are professional versus trying to seek AI that would replace people entirely. A final example I'll give comes from the world of data collection. We all know that these AI systems need enormous and better data collection. Just look at Sharona Hoffman's article called Big Bad Data about the existing data sets in healthcare. Now, at present, all too often, we are trying to do this data collection on the cheap. We're telling doctors, hey, by the way, on top of your incredibly busy, stress-filled job, please enter 4,000 more clicks onto the electronic health record. Doctors don't want to hear this. But what is often a very good solution here is a very low-tech solution of complementing this type of automation, this type of data gathering for automation, with scribes. So we have scribes coming back to hospitals who are assisting the professionals. And I think very often we have situations where if we release artificial intelligence into the wild just alone, we get all sorts of problems. The problem of shadow work, there's a whole book on shadow work that critiques the ways in which automation really is just creating more work for people that are ostensibly being freed from it. But if we complement that sort of automation with individuals that are professionals, we can get much better results. Now, I've given you 3 examples of when we should do this type of complementary automation in cases where the outcomes are better, where there's sensitive information, and where we can make professionals' lives better. How do we do it? Well, I've got only 30 seconds left, so what I'll say is that in general, my principles are that reimbursement and other rules put forward by CMS, FDA, other regulatory entities can essentially reallocate rather than reduce healthcare spending in order to encourage this form of artificial intelligence and release of it into the wild, and that we should respect rather than replace the human element in care. I have a few publications that are in these areas, and I'd be happy to talk to others further, either online or here, about their relevance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frank.